Before today's episode, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and recognise their continued connection to the beautiful land and sea. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I extend this acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land my listeners are on. Welcome to Ritual the Podcast, your cottage in the woods. A sacred space for the witches, the healers, the magical folk to meet and speak of wisdom, witchery, and old world magic, where people come to learn, to hear stories, to share secrets, and to be free to be their true selves. Welcome to Ritual.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Ritual. My name is Amy Harvey and I am excited to be joined with yet another amazing guest today. This guest is somebody who I have followed on Instagram and like all the different platforms now for a while. And I knew I wanted to get her on the show, but I was trying to find like the right angle rather than like, hi, I stalk you on Instagram all the time. Can you talk to me?
Aww.
But then she's coming out with a book and I'm like, that's the perfect excuse. So I am so excited to have Leah here. Now you may know her if you do follow her on Instagram as the redheaded witch?
Redheaded witch.
Redheaded witch. But we will call her Leah today. So Leah, thank you so much for being here. It is so exciting to have you.
Aw, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. Anytime it doesn't happen often, but anytime someone wants me to collaborate with them or speak with them or be featured as a guest, it's always just I just am so grateful for that. So thank you.
No, I'm so happy to have you here. You know what? That's what I love. Like social media can be a really wild place. It's like you get all kinds of creatures on there. But one thing that I love is that you can have the ability to connect with people all around the world. And when you follow each other, it's like you automatically recognize we have something in common and we totally vibe each other. And I love that because it's like it makes friends for you. It's like, hey, you should follow this person because you'd get along really well. I love
Absolutely. that. Honestly, that whole idea was the reason why I even started to share my practice online was because I was moving away from my hometown of 20 plus years. And I was like, how am I gonna meet friends? Meeting friends just gets more complicated the older you get. And I'm not someone who goes out very often. I'm quite introverted. So, but I love social media and I love creating, just creating in general. So that's, when TikTok became a thing. So I started on TikTok first. And that's where I have met some of the most genuine people I have ever come across. And it was because we were all in the same community space of witchcraft and spirituality and occultism. And yeah, that's just that's how it all started of me even posting online was like, I want to make friends. How do I do that? Gotta put yourself out there first. Okay.
I know. I always say I'm an extroverted introvert. So I can appear to be really out there and bubbly, but to my core, I'm like, I'd prefer just to stay home and not talk to anyone today. So I think it's good because it's kind of like, I'll do the work for you, but you at least have to respond to that person. I'm like, I can do that. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I always like to start with this question. Do you have a morning ritual? Now, this can be like a mundane one or a magical one or a combination of the two, but how do you like to start each day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like for me, it really does shift depending on where I'm at. So, right now my life is a little bit in a shift. So my schedule is kind of a little bit more flexible. And I found myself kind of creating this new ritual where I spend a lot of time kind of awakening my house spirit and the spirits of my house. And so there's a few ways that I do this, but one of the ways that I like to do it is I use incense. It's an all natural incense from this local company here in the Pacific Northwest called Sea Witch Botanicals.
I love it already.
I love the smell of their incenses. They're so great. And so I like to kind of walk around my house with it and
Mhm.
just really spend some time saying good morning to my plants, saying good morning to my ancestors. I have a few other spirits that I have, like I have a rabbit and I have a statue for Goddess Bridget. And so I really like to just be mindful and kind of wake up with the spirits of my home and just like
Mhm.
the spirit of my house in general. And then I like to spend time at my altar afterwards. So once I'm at my altar, that kind of, it depends on how I'm feeling. Like if I woke up with like anxiety for whatever reason, or if I had like a really weird dream, I like try to record it as quickly as possible,
Mm.
or just spend some time journaling. And yeah, I kind of leave space for it to be fluid. Whatever it is that I am needing in that moment, I will create, magic around it as well and kind of figure out how I can incorporate that into my day, just to make sure that I start it on a good note. I don't always start with a tarot reading. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I can rest you assure you that I always start it with coffee. So
You got it.
and it's just it's how I ground myself. The brewing process itself is like a grounding ritual for me. I have an espresso machine, but sometimes I do pour overs or French presses, and I like to share that with my ancestors, so I will always pour a little bit for them each morning.
Beautiful.
So
It's very refreshing for you to say that, because you have no idea how many people I've spoken to on here who goes, "Oh, no, I don't really drink coffee." And I'm like, "What? What is wrong with you?"
yeah, since opening my coffee shop or my coffee brand,
Mhm.
I have come across individuals who were like, we started to get a lot of inquiries for tea blends, which was something that we were going to branch out to anyway, but I didn't think that we would do it so soon.
Yeah.
And it was because I was so shocked of like, so many people were really excited about our syrups, and they were like, are you going to have tea or decaf? And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, okay, yeah. So people, there are people out there that really want this. So we're gonna have to branch out a lot quicker than I thought.
I mean,
Uh,
I'm mainly a decaf drinker purely because if I have more than one like normal coffee, I will be a anxiety fueled mess. So I get it.
I do too. Like, when I was working in the coffee industry, most of the time I was morning shift. So I would be at the coffee shop like 5 a.m. in the morning and having to like dial in our espresso machine. And so it's all manual. So I'm sitting there like having 6 espressos, making sure on point for our customers for the day. And I'm sitting there like shaking and trembling, like trying to like eat a bagel at the same time of like services that are coming in.
I'm feeling very mentally unstable and I don't know why.
I think my caffeine intake would be like, leveled up. Absolutely not. It
No,
just was never, I could never just adjust to
no,
it.
I get that. I get that. Now you mentioned Bridget. So is she a deity that you work with primarily? Like, do you work with others, or is she your main gal?
Yeah, that's something that I haven't really spoken about a whole lot online, and that's because my personal experience with deities is quite like it's as clear as mud. I feel like some moments of my life when I have welcomed a deity into my practice or reached out to a deity in my practice, some of those experiences are really profound, and a lot of the times it's quite gentle, and it's quite, not as theatrical as like I
Yeah.
see a lot of the times. It specifically is a figure that I feel very like inspired by,
Mm.
and I am actually reading more about her stories. I think it's a book on scribed, and it's by Pagan Portals. I don't know if you're familiar by it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
and
Love them.
I love them. They're so like specific and
And
just
short, so you can just like get to the point.
filled with information. And Bridget's story is one that I kept hearing repeatedly throughout my entire practice. And I just continued to kind of follow that thread. And over time, when I came to a specific moment in my life that was really an emphasis on healing, I kept feeling called to her because of just how nurturing I felt her energy, and also just the emphasis of like taking care of yourself, you know, kind of like you know, self-care and nourishing. And so she's just a figure that I have always kind of included in my practice. And I wouldn't say like it's centered around her or anything. But she is someone that I look up to, and you know, a figure that I have in my home to kind of call upon. She also was some inspiration during my writing process too.
Yes.
So,
Well, she's
yeah,
goddess of creativity.
exactly. And so that was really when I started to you know, focus on calling on her energy and connecting with her in some way, because I really struggled at the beginning of the creative process of constructing my book, and what that was going to look like and how it was going to unfold. So I did a lot of meditations with her, with the intent for like it to just come forth and for it to unfold in the way that it's meant to. So I really did just kind of trust that process, and she was an influence and a leader in that way.
I love that. I work with Bridget as well. And I think she's like an interesting energy to work with, because she is like very soft and loving and there when you need her. But at the same time, she's like that Irish mum energy of like kicking you up the ass, going like, all right, enough now. I'll give you a hug, but you need to do something about it.
Yes, absolutely. I feel that for my ancestors too, because they I come from a very long line of farmers and coal miners. And so they are like, if you want to see change, you got to get shit done.
Yeah.
And so that's when I'm like, you know, sitting here, like throwing a fit, like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this happening? They're like, well, did you like actually do something about it today? And I'm like, okay, fair.
No. Now I need to go way, way back. So
Okay.
how did your journey into witchcraft begin? Like, is this something that you always were? Like, did you grow up in that world, or did it come to you at a certain point in time? Like, how did you become the witch you are today?
I feel like my journey is so it's quite interesting, because I actually grew up Southern Baptist.
So the
I
opposite.
Yes, and I always say that though I grew up as a Southern Baptist, I can't say that it 100% translated into my home. Like, you
Yeah.
know, we would go to church because it was what you did in our community and everything, especially living in the southeast of America.
Whereabouts were you?
So I was in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Yeah.
And so, and my dad's entire side of the family is like from that general area. So I had all of my, you know, family members were Southern Baptist, Christian. I actually have some family members that were missionaries, all of it. And so it was really like, and you know, really emphasized on our family. I actually have a vivid dream of my papa like giving me and my cousin a lecture, because my cousin, I think, said something about like not believing in God, and my papa was like, no, like you. And like that memory was like instilled in my brain. But my parents weren't, you know, very strict about it. Especially when my parents had split up, I was pretty young, and I grew up with my dad, and my dad never forced us to go to church or anything like that. He really encouraged us to kind of think for ourselves, because he himself wasn't going to, you know, didn't believe and didn't go to church. So at that point, you know, I always felt really connected to nature. I was always spending time in the creek. The weeping willow in my front yard was like my best friend. I would write it letters, put it like, you know, bury it. And I just had this spiritual connection, but I didn't know what it was. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have a meaning to it. All I knew is that I felt safe with it. I felt, you know, nourished by it. And I just, that was enough for me. Um, and I would say, you know, probably in my early 20s, my mom and I, as I got older, my mom and I had more of a relationship, and she was pretty spiritual. You know, she went to church, but her and I would also read our horoscopes together. We would also talk about like our paranormal experiences together. And my mom is like, you know, she has a lot of premonition, like dreams. She's a
Mm.
very intuitive person. And so when I got older, the more and more we spoke about it, the more and more open-minded, her and I both became, and we kind of shared that together. And she was the one who had like the very first oracle deck growing up. Like I would sit there and do like an oracle reading with her, and just so many things. So I grew up in a very open-minded space, despite having roots of a Southern Baptist like upbringing.
That's quite rare.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I'm very thankful that my both of my parents, kind of allowed that space for me to grow into my own person, and
Yeah.
continue to support me, despite, differences in beliefs or anything like that. But in my early 20s, I would say, is when I really started to practice occultism and getting into witchcraft, because I experienced like some loss in my life. And that grief journey was the catapult into it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Interesting. And so what kind of, like, if you were to label yourself as a kind of witch, what would that label be?
So I describe my practice as a folkloric traditional practice. So, much of my practice is an emphasis on my ancestors.
Yeah.
And, I grew up in a pretty disconnected home after my parents' divorce. And so there's a lot of healing that needed to be done. And I always felt quite outcasted, which seems maybe like a little odd that ancestors would be something that I focused on, because feeling that certain way. But I guess a part of me, I really wanted to get to the root of a lot of things in my own family. And so I felt like really called to kind of reach out to the ancestral spirits. And it was that journey that led me to where my practice is today. So focusing on a lot of folk magic of the Appalachian Mountains, which is where my dad's side of the family has been for generations. And that inspired me to look, kind of even further back of our family tree, of being like, okay, like where are they from? And a lot of them are rooted from England and Scotland. And so my husband is actually from England. And so we spend a lot of time going back and forth. We try to go back every other year to England. And, that's like one of the ways that I like to kind of reconnect, is to learn about like the history there, and kind of like putting my feet in their shoes and just learning kind of like their ways, and like what kind of life they may have had, and the decisions that they made, despite that might be very difficult to do. So but yeah, so that's kind of.
You know what I find interesting? I've always I don't know what it is, but whenever I hear ancestor work, for some reason, I just have always struggled connecting with it. I don't know if it's because when I think of grandparents, on my dad's side, my grandparents are awesome, but on my mum's side, they're really super toxic. So I think maybe I was always well, why would I want to connect with them? And then I've been reading that book. Have you read The Crooked Path?
Yes.
Love it. So fucking good. But they talked about ancestor work, and they split it up into three. So there's ancestor work where it's literal relatives and ancestors of your bloodline. Then there's ancestors of nature, and the spirits that have dwelled of where you are. But then there's also the ancestors of witches of the past. And I was like, that is such a cool way to look at ancestor work, to open it up into those three different categories. It just kind of opened my mind even more to go, right, I get it. There's so much more wisdom there, because it would be quite hard for people who don't have that strong family tie to be well, why would I want to call on them? But when you look at it that way, I think it's so cool.
Yeah, and I talk about it as well in my book, because for me, when I was thinking about what book I wanted to write for someone who was just kind of getting familiar with a magical path and what that might look like.
Yeah.
As a folkloric traditional witch, you have traditional witchcraft itself is such a big umbrella term, so, and it's going to depend entirely on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And so for me, that practice looks like, asking the question, what were the traditions of the people before me, of the community that or before me, where I live now, where my family's from, like who make up who I am today. Now that right there, who makes me who I am today, it's not only just your blood relatives.
No.
It's going to be any elder, anyone who you have come in contact with that provided some wisdom to you.
Hey everyone, I'm just going to pause today's episode for a moment. I hope you're enjoying it. It sounds super interesting. If you're enjoying this podcast and you're thinking, hey, how could I support this show? Then the best way to do that is to jump over to Patreon and become one of my patrons, where you'll get access to additional content, videos, bonus episodes of Ritual with Amy Harvey, that is me, learning tools to help you on your witchy path, and special discounts to my online store, rosethorncottage.com. Take it away, voiceover guy.
That's right, simply head to patreon.com/Rosethorn Cottage to get all the goodies and support your favourite podcast in the entire world, Ritual with Amy Harvey. Now, back to the show.
Because I can say, you know, I moved out at a very young age. I moved out when I was 15 years old.
Wow.
And so I had a lot of adults in my life and elders in my life who were not blood related, who were absolutely ancestors to me, because they provided safety, they provided knowledge to me, they provided love to me. And that's what I talk about in my book, is that yes, your ancestors all are your family tree, and they are in your community.
Yeah.
You know, they are individuals who you know, provide wisdom, who provide knowledge. And they're even, you know, like my husband's side of the family are my ancestors. Like,
Yeah.
That's kind of how I personally define it. And I talk about that in my book, because I recognize a lot of the times there is that wound of like, I don't know if I want to reach out to my sister.
They're not nice.
I absolutely feel that too. Like, you know, there's always you're going to come across like a troubled ancestor. And I address that too in my book of how we can go about that, you know, if we decide to. And that's the thing. It's like, you don't have to incorporate ancestors at all in your practice.
No.
And I make that so apparent. I'm like, you have every right to decide your boundaries with ancestral spirits, and you have every right to decide how and what role they play, if any at all.
So speaking of your book, so you're coming out with a book. It's very exciting. Can you tell us about it? I know you've kind of just touched on it a little bit then, but tell us all about it. What is it called? What's it about?
Yeah, so it's called The Beginner Witch's Handbook. It is available for pre-order now, and it's on shelves September 26th.
Mm-hmm.
And other than, you know, touching on like what ancestral work looks like and veneration and about that, I do talk about traditional witchcraft and what that is. So like the previous occultists that, you know, kind of define what traditional witchcraft that we see today. And also I touch on animism, because to me, I think that's you know, a foundation for a practice like this, because it really is rooted in where you are, you know, connecting to the spirits of place, connecting to the community of where you are. So I touch on some practices there. And I also talk about, you know, how we can find some inspiration of folk magic too, which is kind of lend itself of, you know, when we are discovering our ancestry and our ancestors and our communities, we'll come across a lot of the time some superstitions and some methods that they use mundanely as well as magically.
Yeah.
And so like, what ways can we find inspiration and utilize, you know, this information, this knowledge in our own craft?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of, you know, it's beginner friendly. It's with the curious spirit in mind. I always say, of someone who is just, you know, kind of like tipping their toe into it, not really sure. But my hope is that even individuals who have been on this path for some time can find some sort of like juicy inspiration in it. And then in addition, I do include 30 beginner friendly spells, ranging from to cleansing, to protecting, and for the witch. So yeah,
that's exciting.
And the photography in it is all done by me too.
Stop it. So you're like doubly talented. That's so annoying.
I used to be in the photography, like wedding industry. So I love it. Photography is my first love. It really is.
It is very fun. You do. Well, if
Yeah.
you look at your Instagram as well, it's so beautiful. So you can tell that you've got the eye for that.
Thank you.
It's funny that you mentioned animism because I recently spoke to, and I think you know her, Celeste Larson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's so cool. But she was talking about animism, and I have never really like kind of learnt about it until she mentioned it. And it was like this light bulb went off in my brain because I was like, oh my God, like, yes, it just makes so much sense. Like, essentially, it's almost like everything kind of has its own energy and spirit. Is that kind of how you would say it?
Yeah, absolutely. You think like the plant allies that we connect with and like their individual spirits, and the spirit of the place. And I think some witches kind of interpret animism maybe a bit differently in their own practice, or how
Yeah.
they kind of put it into practice. And for me, it extends to like the spirit of my house, the spirit
Yes.
of like my coffee cup, the spirit of like even like my vehicle, like driving, like
Love that.
I don't know about you, but like I name every one of my vehicles. And so like my very first car was Betty. And so I'm like, Betty, like stop stalling on the highway. And so that to me is how I see animism. It
Yeah.
really has like its own essence, its own spirit.
I love that. I
And
just
so
think it just makes the world even more brighter when you like look at everything rather than like an object or a thing. You go, everything has got this life in it, like especially your home. And I'm always telling people like you need to see your home almost like an extension of your practice or your most important like witchy tool, because it's where you sleep, where you eat, where you rest, where you work, where you meditate, everything. And so you need to treat it with that respect. And I think when you think of it from like an animistic point of view, you go, well, yeah, because it's alive.
I also feel like, when we read a lot of folklore, for example, and we read about giants and we read about like other like divine beings, sometimes I ask myself, like, a lot of our ancestors had an animistic belief. They felt
Yeah.
like the spirit of the place. And this could have been one of the ways that they personified nature to answer questions of humanity, questions of nature. And that's just something that I had thought a lot about. And when I read stories, I'm like, wow, like the world is just so alive. And I felt that when I was younger too. It's why I
Yeah.
always visited the creek or the weeping willow, and I just felt like they were friends. They were spirits just like me. And
Totally.
and
So
I this makes life a little bit less lonely.
I agree. I love that. I love that like way of looking at the world. I think it's just so beautiful. And so folklore is a big part of your practice. So how do you use it? How do you incorporate in your practice? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of the times, like I specifically like to read stories from England and Scotland
Yeah.
again, to kind of learn more about what perhaps my ancestors, what wisdom and what stories they took with them, especially as they moved into the New World and kind of, took root into the Appalachians.
Yeah.
I see a lot of stories in the Appalachian Mountains as like the hills in England and Scotland, and that's just because like those communities ended up coming over here to the Appalachians. And so how I use that as inspiration in my own practice, it's really like seeing like how do they have this relationship with nature, like how did they see the waters of the ocean, how did they see like what kind of stories linger there, what kind of like divine beings live in the woods, like. And so for me it's like you also see these superstitions that rise up, like, oh, like make sure you bring along like a charm bag, or don't respond to a voice that you or a cry
Yes.
night, it's all of these like superstitions that you start to learn, and then from there you hear like charms to counter it, to protect you, to heal you.
Yeah.
And that's how I find so much inspiration for my own practice, because I'm like, if I am wanting a charm for traveling to protect me during my travels, like what is something that was brought up in England and Scotland or Appalachia, like what is something that they have used. And so like the rowan tree is like one that was often talked about. And so rowan twigs from a rowan tree being used for a rowan's cross. It's kind of, you go down a rabbit hole, that's for sure.
You know what? I think it's like divine timing that we're speaking, because at the moment on my like For You page on TikTok, I just keep getting videos of, now I would know that we say this wrong, and I usually would say Appalachian, which is wrong. So it's Appalachian.
Yeah, well, it depends on who you ask. So like, I mean,
You would say Appalachian.
I say Appalachian. Mm-hmm.
So I keep getting videos of like all these crazy stories from the Appalachian woods and the forest and the mountains there. And I'm like so invested in them, because I'm like, holy shit, there's some scary stuff going on in there.
And you have to think about like just the amount of history that's there too.
Yes.
It's so much, and you can feel it when you're there as well. And you have so many, culture exchange and stories, like from the indigenous communities there to like the Scots and Irish that were there to the Germans that were. You have so many communities coming together and exchanging stories, and then you just have like the history itself of like the wars, the battles, everything that happened there.
A lot of energy.
And then you step into it and you're like, oh my goodness. Like, to be quite honest, I loved hiking there, and I love camping, but there was like this one campground that I would go to growing up that I absolutely hated camping at, but my friends loved it. They were like, let's go camping here. And I'm like, there's just something that like, I'm scared. The minute the sun would go down, I'm in my tent. I'm like, I felt so like watched, and I just, I don't know who or what or anything like that. And it's just, you hear so many stories, especially there.
Well, that's what I keep hearing. And I was like, I have to ask Leah, has she like had an encounter with anything? Because so many people have, and I'm like fascinated by it now.
So I can't say that I've had an encounter with a divine being like that.
Yep.
I have definitely felt something or someone on multiple occasions. Like I said, like that specific campground, I personally did not like to camp. It just was so heavy. It was like bad. It just felt heavy. It felt like I wasn't alone, even though I wasn't alone because I had friends, but like
something more.
It was something more. And I wasn't brave enough at the time to really explore anymore. I knew to just leave it alone. And that's the thing. Like sometimes, like you see those like movies and they're like, oh my gosh, what was that? And you go and like into
don't find out.
There's some things that to just leave alone. And that's how and I left it alone. I didn't explore, and that's the thing too, is like so much respect for those hills and the spirits that are there. And I think that as long as you practice that, you're gonna be fine. But I've had experiences too that were really profound and powerful with a dear friend of mine who was born and raised in those mountains, and her spiritual connection with them is just amazing and inspiring. And I did a ritual for my ancestors actually in the mountains, and it was just so amazing. I have such a hard time putting it into the words because it was all just so much emotion. But when we were coming back, and my friend, now mind you, my friend, like she is hiking in those trails all the time. She knows them like the back of her hand. And we were hiking back and she was like, this trail has like shifted. She was like, somehow like we got like turn around, and we didn't even go that far into the woods. So like we were pretty close to like the main road. And she works with a Morgan, and so she like called onto her and asked for
She's a
some
good
assistance.
force to have.
Did you not, like, this crow came and like perched up on the tree above us, and she like spoke to it, and it went a certain direction. She was like, okay, so we got to follow that way. And we got out, we followed that crow, and we went straight out. And we were like, I'm like, at that point, I was like, wow, there is so much more to these mountains than I have ever really like given credit for. And it was amazing. It's a beautiful
I love
place.
it. I love it. And it's the kind of place where I'm like, oh my gosh, like what cool stories. And like they go, would you want to visit there? And you go, no.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, there's just so many stories. I think the really interesting thing that I have found, specifically when I started to research more folklore specific to like areas, is that really is depending on like almost the county too itself. Like
Yeah.
I grew up in Henderson County, and so then you have like Buncombe County, and then you have like just over the hills, and their stories are going to be different despite being only 2 hours away. And I think that's something that's really interesting, and something that we can kind of learn from. Like, it all depends on who you ask and where you grew up. And
Totally. What I love about folklore as well is I recently was teaching a class about like seasonal witchery, and I was talking about how like at Beltane you would do like fae magic, and people are like, oh, I just find it really hard to like believe that there's like something like a fairy out there. And I'm like, you know what helps is when you look at folklore and you go, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, every country has a story. And it talks about like their version of the Fae, but they all are so connected with everybody around the world. And you go, at that time, they didn't have like Facebook or anything where they could swap stories. And they had these same experiences. And you go, you can't deny that. Like it's there right there for you. And I love that about folklore is that it goes, yes, this shit is real.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I love seeing kind of like how they have their similarities and differences, and how they've really like weaved through time and place. And I think it's amazing too that it's just one of the things that has continued to be revived and to live on our stories. And I appreciate that so much.
Totally. Now going on to something extremely important, which we were talking about before, which is coffee.
Yes.
You have got your own coffee magic.
Yes.
So that's folk craft coffee.
Folk craft coffee.
Can you tell me more about why you wanted to make it and what it's all about?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Folk craft coffee is seriously like my heart. Other than my book is also my heart, but
They're your two children.
They are. My book is my spirit, my coffee is my heart, I would say.
Oh, that's such a nice way to look at it.
Yeah. So I was
Your husband's like, oh, wow, thanks.
Yeah, I know. He's going to listen to this and be like, you didn't mention me at all.
So you are my roommate.
Yeah, you're my roommate. So I've been in the coffee industry for some time now. And growing up, coffee was something that was really important in our household. Before moving to North Carolina and living there, we lived in Seattle for years. And growing up, like my dad would religiously go to Starbucks. That was his church, right? So
I get that.
Yeah. And so I kind of see coffee like growing up as something that was like a staple in our household. And I started drinking it at a very young age. Like, I mean, I started to kind of like wake myself up to catch the bus for school, like, when I was like 14, 13 or something. And I was like, I gotta have my coffee, I'm at that age. And so throughout my entire life, I have always found myself back in the coffee industry. I didn't really know what I wanted to do career-wise or anything like that. And, one of my first jobs was working at a coffee shop, and I just always met like the best people. Like my coworkers were always amazing. There were always friends that I would keep around forever. And I don't know, it just always felt at home. And so, the older I got and I found myself, back in the coffee industry, working at a coffee shop after working a job that I really thought was like going to be my dream job. I just ended up falling miserable, and I was like, nope, can't do it. I'm just going to work at this coffee shop that just opened up in our hometown. And little did I know that whole experience would change my life. Because again, I found myself like surrounded by really great people who ended up being such a huge support system. And one of the things that I really appreciated about it was that coffee shops are like hubs for like creatives and
For everything. People always meet there.
Yes. And I really liked that. I really liked how there was an emphasis on community. And the coffee shop that I was working at the time, they really did focus on community efforts.
Yeah.
So they did a lot of nonprofits, or they hosted a lot of events and art shows and everything like that. And I just really enjoyed my time there. And it's funny because I look back when I was a kid and I'm like, oh, I would always make my Barbie like own like a coffee shop or something like that. And I remember my mom even telling me when I was younger, she was like, you're going to own your own coffee shop. And I was like, I don't know. I want to be like a editor-in-chief for like 17 magazine. And I just didn't really believe it. And then the older I got, it was like, I just keep coming back to this because it's aligned with a personal value of mine of connecting with individuals. And one of the most like profound conversations I had was with a coworker of mine. And he was like, Leah, have you ever thought about what your why is? And I was like, my why? What does that mean? He's like, yeah, like I was listening to this podcast, and he told me about like this podcast episode and how it inspired him to kind of sit down and figure out his why. And I was like, I never really thought about that. Interesting. And so it just had me thinking of like, okay, if I had to define it, because I also think it's important to be flexible, to be fluid, you can shift as you grow older and wiser and, and everything. And so I was like, I really want to inspire others through creativity and bring joy. And coffee was like a result of that. And it's, not only is it something that I like enjoy personally, but like magically, it has been something that has shown up repeatedly in my life to connect me with other people. And so it's just something that I wanted to do for the witchcraft and occult spiritual community, is like something that a lot of us can and do use it for ourselves mundanely, also use in our practice, whether that's an offering to your spirits or storing your intentions for your morning ritual. Like it was a shared love. And so that's really what inspired me was, after moving away and like quitting my coffee job, I was so sad. But I knew like what I envisioned for myself and what I really wanted to do. And so, that's kind of led me to where I am today. And so the vision has always been for it to be a physical space. Yeah. But now it's, digital. And I'm really excited to see, and I'm really excited to put energy into seeing it grow.
You can tell like it's so beautiful. And what I love is it's like someone went, I want coffee, but make it witchy, because there's like so many different like elements to it. Because coffee in itself, I think people forget that coffee has its own magic, just like everything. It can ground you, even though you would think it would do the opposite effect. You can use it in spell work to like speed things up. Like there's so many magical properties to it. And I love that you've kind of combined both things together. I think that's so beautiful.
It felt really natural to me. And I think, it just felt right. And I kept coming back to it. And I remember like having this conversation with my mom long ago. Ironically, the day I was laid off my corporate job, and I called her and I was like, I just have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like, I have been in marketing for, so many years now. I thought this is what I wanted to do, but I'm just like, I'm not happy and I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, and it was the same, shortly after my husband and I like launched Full Craft and started to get the support and the recognition and like people like actually wanting it. And so we were like, wow, there's a lot of like possibilities here. And my mom was like, well, why don't you like really put your energy into it? Like stop treating it as like a side thing. Start treating it as like your main focus. And I was like, I just don't know. Like I'm just, gonna find another corporate job. And literally hours later, I was laid off. And I called my mom.
The universe did the job for you.
I know. That's what's insane. So I called my mom back up and I was like, what the heck did I do? I was like, mixture of like discouragement, mixture of like grief, mixture of like excitement and like optimism. And I was like, I don't know what to feel right now. And I'm, still working through it because it's just I'm in such a liminal space. But coffee has been my North Star. It has been where I've kept my eyes on and what has always repeatedly been there for me.
And like, what a cool symbol to say it's your North Star. And then when you get laid off, that's all of a sudden what your focus is. Like, it's just so perfect. That's so cool. Yeah. And so if you had your own space, have you got a vision of what it would look like?
Oh, of course. Like my mom and I share like a Pinterest board. We're
what would the vibe be?
So the vibe is that, it would be like, I say practical magic vibes because let's be honest, like that, up on that, like
I'm coming. You've sold me.
My mom and I watched that when I was younger, like when it first came out, and this is when I was like, is my mom really a Christian? And I love like the exposed brick. I love like the elements. I love obviously plants are going to be involved. But one of the things that I really want to integrate is having like a space, and I don't know if it'll be a separate room or whatever, but more so for us to do like community gatherings. Cause again, I kind of think back to like, what makes it a little bit different than other coffee shops that we may have in town. And I think about like, okay, I really love the idea of having a space for, community gatherings, like full moon things, or even having other like people come and teach and have their own like community gatherings, like host them, be like, oh, you're just visiting and you have a community here, like please use the space. Or workshops. My mom, she used to own a quilting store when I was growing up, and she is kind of revisiting another like creative dream of hers that's in the realm of quilting. And so she was like, I would love to teach classes that are like under this realm. And quilting is very like you can integrate so much witchcraft, so much magic into quilting. I was like, yes, please. And so we were brainstorming together. And I think it's so funny because my mom, she's a dreamer, but she's also very much a doer.
Good.
And so she's like, okay, so this is like, here's the floor plan. And I'm like, floor plan? I was like, are we building this? And she just cracked me up. And she's like, yeah, we have to have like a space for like your herbs and stuff. And then we have to have a patio right here. And this is where I'm going to have my section. And like, she's a planner. And I appreciate that so much because that's like what I need in my life.
Yeah.
Of, like, taking things to the next level. And I think, I just keep going back because there were so many moments at my altar where I would sit here and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, just give me a glimmer, give me something. And it just, things would just kind of fall into place. And so
I love it. That's so exciting. Yeah. I will be there. I will fly over. As soon as you said practical magic, I'm like, I know what cafe I'm going to go to first.
Yeah. So I'm excited. We'll see how it unfolds.
So cool. All right. So we've done the morning. Let's go to the end of the day. Do you have an evening ritual?
So a lot of the times that's when I do a lot of my reading and kind of like more like study, you could say, or just kind of like reading my witchcraft books or revisiting like old favorites and everything. So that's kind of like my routine. I don't really have like a whole like big ritual or anything. Like I said, I'm pretty fluid. A lot of the times I will like take a shower and just kind of like rinse off the day.
You got to do that.
Or if I have time or the energy, I'll take like a cleansing bath and just kind of like remove it. And something I've been doing a lot recently is calling back my energy too. You know, I think throughout the day, we kind of like disperse our energy into like people or just like places or situations or something, you know, especially if like, you know, you spend all day at work and like service industry job or something like that, and you just get like completely drained. And I think there's a lot of times we'll come across people who just like kind of take a little bit of that away from us, and it's just so I've spent some time writing out like an incantation that I say every night of calling back my energy cleansed and restored so that I can move forward, and then, you know, be just kind of have that back to myself, just cleansed, ready for the next day.
Beautiful. That's good. I like that. What book are you reading at the moment?
So I actually started the Practical Magic series. It's not like, you know, studying, but I'm trying to like expand, you know, my reading selection.
You just made my life. I'm so happy.
I loved the movie. Like I said, I grew up on it, and I never really took the time to read the series. And so
it's so good.
On Threads, I was like, okay, like what are your like cozy witchy books? Because I'm in the market for one. And I had, as like someone was like, Practical Magic series, and I was like, what?
Yes.
So
it's I'm on the best.
I'm like on the prequel, like before, like, you know,
anything. With Maria. Yes. Oh my God, I'm so excited for you. They're like the ones that I will read over and over and over again. So anytime someone else reads it, I'm like, are you loving it?
Yes. Yeah. That's like my, you know, fun one. And then I'm also reading the Bridget's Pagan Portals one. Cool. So yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so before we finish, I have got 5 questions. These are the speed round questions, very important ones.
Okay.
Okay. First, what is a movie you could watch 1,000 times and never get sick of?
You know what I'm going to answer. It's going to be Practical Magic.
Again, you've made me so happy.
or okay, I'll get outside of the realm of that. Garden State. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
It's got Natalie Portman in it. And it's got, I can never remember his name. He's in Scrubs. Anyway.
Zach Braff?
Yeah. It's kind of it's a cutesy one.
Cool.
Natalie Portman's very cute in it.
So. She's amazing.
Great soundtrack.
What is a book that changed your life?
Oh wow. I would say Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horn.
Ooh.
Yeah, if you've not read that one yet and you're kind of of folk witchcraft, that's a very good book for beginners, especially because he explores spirits of the land, and he also explores the familiar spirit, which I don't think a lot of books touch on. I think the Crooked Path on that a little bit.
Possibly, I haven't got up to that yet.
Yeah, but he does a really great introductory, and he has like practices and rituals that you can do yourself.
Cool.
And so I've done quite a few of his that were really amazing. So
awesome. Definitely. I will write that one down. If you could go in a time machine, would you go to the future or would you go to the past?
That is so hard.
Isn't it good?
People usually say.
I've never asked anyone that question.
Oh, really? This is the first one?
You're the first one.
I'm like setting the foundation here.
Yeah, better be good.
Dang.
I know.
There's so much I would do differently in the past, but I feel like where I'm at now, I've accepted the past, so I'm gonna go forward.
Love it.
Yeah.
If you could be an animal for a day, What animal would you be?
I would be a cardinal, a bird.
Ooh, why?
So cardinals are very significant in North Carolina. It's the state bird, but it's also in folklore. It's believed that a past loved one would visit you as a cardinal.
Oh,
And I just think that they're really beautiful. It's also one of the birds that my husband has tattooed on his hands.
oh,
Ever knowing anything about that. And I think they're beautiful. And also I would love to fly around and just be free like a bird.
yes. All right, last one. What would your perfect day look like?
Oh gosh. That's so funny that you ask me that because I feel like that's something I've been trying to envision for myself.
Mm,
It's like what my perfect day would
yeah.
be. Because I have been in such like a constant go that I've never really had time to sit and consider that. But I honestly feel like I would say a perfect day for me is like near a body of water. Like whether
Yeah.
that's a lake, whether that's the ocean or a river or a waterfall. I love waterfalls personally, so I love to sit by a waterfall of some sort. And there's some really amazing ones here in the Pacific Northwest that my husband and I are starting to kind of explore more of.
Yeah.
I think that's so cleansing and just so healing. There's just something about being near it.
Yeah.
So, give me some iced coffee, give me something to read, some good food, please. And I think that would be so great. And just surrounded by friends, like just having a good time near a body of
Perfect.
water.
Perfect answer. Good one. Well, before we
Yeah.
go, can you tell everyone where they can find you and also where they can pre-order your book?
Yes. So I am the Redheaded Witch on platforms, including Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Those are my most used platforms. I also have a Patreon too, if you want to join that. And as far as my book, it's called The Beginner Witch's Handbook, and you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Oh my gosh, I don't even remember the whole list of places that it's available, but you can find it in the link in my bio
Cool.
as well.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
Yay. Thank you so much for coming. It was such a joy to chat with you. I feel like I already kind of knew you, but now we can officially say we know each other.
Yes, absolutely. I love that.
Well, thank you. And everyone go and check out Leah and get her book immediately. And thank you again, Leah. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.